The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. It's getting harder to convince people that the police are bigger problems than the criminals. Murders have spiked up by close to 30% in 2020, the biggest one-year increase since 1960. Aggravated assault rose by 12%, and violent crime overall increased by 5.6%. Now, this is pretty awful, don't you think? Now, I want to welcome to my show when we will discuss this whole issue. And the two guests that I have on the show today are Michael Solomon, who's been on our show many times, and he has written a book called Under the Divvy Tree, and it's his newest book. And then we have Joel Segal, who's a former senior representative to John Connors. I want to welcome both of you to the Susan Brender Show.
Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure, Susan. I'm glad to be back with you.
Well, I'm so delighted. We're dealing, as I said, with so much crime going on. I saw something the other day in Chicago. There was a police car, and then around the police car, there was a car had the doors open, just going around the police. What is happening? Michael, what is happening with this whole notion that we're dealing with so much crime and they want to cut the police? Why?
Well, this whole thing started in Minnesota last year, Minneapolis actually, and it is getting out of control. There are, God, I can't tell you, almost 1 million police officers in the United States, from small municipalities all the way up to New York City, Chicago, and LA, which are the largest departments in the country. And are there few bad apples? Absolutely. Let me give you a little quick history about my own personal, because I'm a retired New York City detective, but let me give you my personal reflection on something that happened with me. When I applied for the police department, I had 2 unpaid parking summonses, a total of $10 in my glove compartment I completely forgot about. Held up my appointment to the police department for a whole year. They put me on probation. Finally got into the police department, and within 10 years, they were hiring ex-felons into the police department. Now, some of these guys were reformed, and yes, they did become good police officers, and they reformed their ways. Most of them, though, went the other way. So the problem that you've got is, even though we've got 99.9% of police officers today of doing their job, doing it properly without a problem, you've got a couple of bad apples in there. But when one bad apple steps out, it tarnishes the entire department politically, not in terms of police response and everything else. And with this woke society today, you can't even step out of bounds. Look what's happening. They have no respect for police officers. In New York, what were they doing? They were taking buckets of water and dumping them on police officers who were just doing their job. I mean, it's ridiculous. The cell phone camera today has become a weapon that they have no idea. If a police officer stops somebody on the street for a stop and frisk violation, right away there's 40 cameras pointing at them, and they have no idea. And when a guy reaches into his pocket for something, you don't know what he's reaching for. So it's absolutely crazy. And the respect, Black Lives Matter, who's burning up cities and running around this country, is getting more respect from people than a police officer goes to work every day and doesn't have any idea if he's going to come home in a box or come home to his family at the end of the day. It's frightening.
Joel, you heard what Michael said. Do you agree with him that there is a major problem going on, or don't you agree? What do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm glad you're raising this issue about crime. I've actually, when I went to law school at UNC Chapel Hill, I worked in the juvenile offenders courts for 2 summers, the adult court. So this is something, I worked in criminal defense law firms. I ran a program called the Kendall Gill House, named after the NBA star basketball player. That was a jobs and training program and counseling for returning felons. We had a 98% success rate. So here's what I think. I participated in some of the Black Lives Matter protests, but I did it with clergy, more as like an interfaith person with a yellow ribbon around my arm. And I remember there was a National Guardsman sent, and a young lady thrust her iPhone into the National Guardman's face and started screaming at him. And I admonished her and I said, that's not what Martin Luther King was all about. And she says, well, what would you know? You're wearing a suit and tie. And I said, well, Martin Luther King also wore a suit and tie. However, the majority of the people that I worked with who were involved in this organizing the street demonstrations, which I found to be absolutely necessary, were law-abiding, very professional, multiracial, all walks of life. I do agree with Michael, though, that you cannot demonize police officers. I remember I was on a radio show out of Washington, D.C., and they asked me, well, what do I think about defunding the police? I said, I think it's the worst slogan I've ever heard. If someone breaks into your house, who are you going to call? Ghostbusters or 911? And, you know, I'm for reforming the police. Number two, we have to have a national discussion about, you know, how are we going to get crime under control? And I just don't feel like the kind of conversations that we need to have, we're not having them, because this issue, just like climate change and everything else, is turning into a political football as opposed to solutions. And what do I think is the best solution? Read my bill that I wrote for John Conyers, HR 1000, jobs for every person who wants to work in the public or the private sector. The best antidote to crime is jobs, opportunity, housing, training. I don't believe in jails. I don't believe in homeless shelters. I think they're an extension of the welfare state. We're not going to, I'll close with this. If we really want to have a conversation about crime, we're going to have a conversation about dramatically expanding the middle class, doing something with handguns, and making sure that we do everything we can to prevent crime, which could be $170,000 a year at Rikers Island and $70,000 a year in North Carolina. Let's put people to work and get people educated, but let's not demonize the police. That's not the problem.
Okay. Now that's very interesting that you mentioned this whole situation. But here's the thing, Joel. Mm-hmm. What about Biden? What about what he is doing with regard to the police? Don't you think that he's really letting this whole issue come to the forefront? And not only that, he is really, I don't know what to say. He wants to demonize the police. Don't you think so, Joel?
I don't see any evidence of that. Now, I might have missed an article in the paper or a quote, but having worked with Biden over the years and his administration, I mean, he was the one who came up with 3 strikes, you're out. So I mean, Senator Cory Booker passed a resolution in the Senate, which basically denounced the whole idea of, you know, this crazy slogan about defunding the police. Quite frankly, I haven't met Democrats or Republicans in the Congress who are for such an asinine idea, because it doesn't make any sense. You don't defund the police, you reform the police. A lot of times, quite frankly, a lot of the police need more funding to, you know, they need to hire more, I think, people who have expertise in conflict resolution or counseling. But once again, I really think we have to have a discussion. Where's the crime being committed? What are these police? What are they going through every day? They're going through war zones. Why are there war zones? It's because we are not dealing with the big elephant in the room, and that is high rates of unemployment, poverty, not having enough programs for returning felons, not doing enough to ensure universal access to quality education. And once again, this cannot be a political football. Look, I'm a policy analyst and a lawyer. I'm about solutions. Let's talk about solutions to crime. let's look at solutions that have worked in other countries and here. And I happen to have run one of the most successful, programs in the nation, and that was transitional housing and jobs and counseling for returning felons. So,
Yeah. I hear
Okay.
you, Joel. Now, Michael, why don't you jump in? You heard
Yeah,
what
well,
Joel had to say. Go on.
Let me bring something up. First of all, I agree with Joel and what he's doing, and I think it's admirable. And yes, jobs is the factor there. But here's the other problem. Okay, when you get the president of the United States, and I'm talking about Barack Obama, stands up and says the police in Cambridge, Massachusetts, are stupid because they arrested a professor who was arrogant and nasty to a police sergeant who only asked him to identify himself when he broke into a house that he was only living in for 2 weeks. And all the police and the neighbors called the police because he was a new neighbor there. He closed on a house. He left town for 2 weeks, came back. He's with the driver. He kicked in the door and the police were called and they went there and he said, I live here. And the police officer said, just show me your identification. And he refused. You have no right to stop me. You have no right to show me my identification. So they arrested him. What did we wind up with? We wind up with a beer summit that Joe Biden was attending in the Rose Garden, which turned out to be the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. And they excoriated the police officer for what? For doing his job? What would have happened had somebody else broken into that house and the police officer didn't ask for his identification and he burglarized the place, and then Gates came home to find out the place was ransacked? What would he have done to the police at that point? I mean, It's just a simple policing. It's what they do. I mean, it's no different than being stopped for speeding and somebody asking you for your driver's license. It's for your identification. But, so it starts off with Obama calling the police stupid. And then from then on, it moved into the Black Lives Matter movement months later, which is totally a scam operation. I mean, the millions of dollars that went into that organization. Look at the president of the organization when she bought 4 homes with the money that was donated to them. I mean, you can't be that way. You've got to do it the right way. They're doing away with street policing in New York City. They did away with the street crimes unit, which took more illegal guns off the street than anywhere else in the world. They stop and frisk. Nobody has any idea. They talk about stop and frisk. They give you the impression that the police officer is picking anybody out of a crowd they want and throwing them against the wall. That's not stop and frisk. I was sworn into the police department in 1966, and we were given the stop and frisk rules. And what it was you carried a card in your pocket, which was in your wallet, which was a stop and frisk card. If you stop somebody, you had a right to stop them if it was suspicious. Now, there's 2 things that Joel has wrote. There's reasonable suspicion and there's probable cause. Reasonable suspicion is a guy wearing a down jacket in the middle of August when it's 95 degrees out and he's got a big bulge under his jacket that looks like he's carrying a shotgun. You have a right to pat him down. You can't go into his pockets. You can't search him, but you can pat him down. If what you feel is a gun and you believe it's a gun, you've just raised reasonable suspicion to probable cause. Then you can search him. But if you go under there and you find out that he's on his way to a baseball game and it's in an air-conditioned building indoors, and that's why he's wearing that jacket, you say, thank you very much. Have a good day. You fill out this card, you file it in a precinct where it occurred, and that's the end of it. But that's what stop and frisk is. It's not just taking people and throwing them against the wall. And that's what they make you think it is. Mayor of New York City was telling everybody at a press conference, we've got to stop that. We can't just have these kids being thrown against the wall by police officers. That's not what's happening. And that's why crime is running rampant.
Right. Michael, let me ask you something. We're dealing with the immigration issue, which is one of the most heinous, scary things. I mean, everybody said they can't believe what's happening. I want you to explain to our audience what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing what they're doing, letting all these people in. What do you think?
Well, I have 2 opinions on it. One, I think they're doing it for votes. And number 2, I don't know what they're doing because the laws that are on the books go back to 1996, when President Clinton signed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, which called for penalties. It even goes back to 1966, with the Hart-Celler Act that Ted Kennedy was the chairman of the committee back then, which changed the immigration policies in the United States. What happened back then was, prior to 1966, there was not immigration in this country, there was emigration. People were leaving, not coming in. That was since 1921. And the argument that we need these people to pick my lettuce and my spinach and everything else, and we need cheap labor, it's the only way we can get things done, doesn't hold water in my book. And I'll tell you why. Because prior to 1965, when we didn't have all these immigrants in this country, I don't know, I had salads, my lettuce was picked, my lawn was mowed, my kids were cared for, my houses were cleaned. Who did it? Americans did it.
Yeah.
So
I have, Michael, let Joel jump in here.
Sure.
Joel, what's your thoughts about what's going on in the border? I mean, look at all the information that's in the newspapers today, and people don't know what to do. They look at that and they say, oh my God, what are we doing? So what do you feel about that? What's your opinion?
Well, there has to be a balance between the Statute of Liberty that we really view as kind of a guiding light of this nation's history. My great-grandparents came to this great country because of the pogroms against Jewish people in Russia. And if you look at, the promise of America since our inception was to give people the opportunity to come here if their countries were experiencing tumultuous events or Holocaust or whatever. And there has to be a balance between making sure that people have a legal, when I say legal, I mean legal, a legal way to come to America. And then you can't, and making sure that you cannot have an open border. By the way, we don't have open borders. That's one point. Second point is we have some very changing conditions, and that's climate change. A lot of the people who are coming from Central America came here because of a drought in Central America. Number two is when you have these hurricanes and all these different, disastrous weather patterns due to, worsened global warming, which every scientist that's of note is agreeing that that's the problem. The governments are so poor that they don't have the money to rebuild housing or apartments or what have you. So we're going to have a very honest conversation about the root causes of mass immigration. In the Haiti example, it was an earthquake, the inability to rebuild from the earthquake because of many problems that are too deep to go into in this call. And then there was job losses in Latin America due to COVID, which was because a lot of the people were working. They lost their jobs as the result of COVID. And now in terms of the narrative of, the immigrants are coming, taking our jobs, what business leaders have told me over and over again is that a lot of the jobs that immigrants are taking are jobs that non-immigrants would not take, either because of the pay or the conditions. If you look at the billions of dollars that immigrants are paying into our tax base due to a sales tax, when I say billions, I mean billions. That is a very good thing. If you look at jobs that are being filled that Americans won't take because of the conditions, that's also a good thing. I'm very pro-business. I want business leaders to be able to have a labor force that's going to be hardworking and dependable. Lastly, the myth about, these immigrants are coming into our country, getting free stuff. We have to examine is that true or false? There needs to be a real study on that. Most people who come here from other countries are afraid to give their social security number. They're afraid they'll be deported. If you're a woman, if you're a man, you're not going to get welfare because that ended with Clinton's Welfare Reform Act. The percentage of people who are getting social services compared to the taxes that are being paid in, there's no comparison. Many more immigrants are paying taxes into the system than taking jobs or funds away. But once again, it's a hard issue, and there has to be a real national discussion, no finger pointing, strictly on what's fair, what are the solutions. I'm really getting sick and tired, by the way, of all these issues becoming like a Dallas Cowboys, Washington Redskins football game. Whatever happened to, sober academic policy discussions where people compromise based on what's best for this country and what's best for people who are really coming from very horrible conditions.
Okay, let me ask you something, Joel. Here's the thing. What we see coming through the border are people who are not legal and people who are dangerous. I mean, take a look at the cartels that are coming in. Take a look at some of the other people from different countries. What do you think about that? I mean, that's got to hit you straight in the nose. I mean, that's the only way I can explain it.
Well, I'm just starting to really study immigration policy now and the history of it. But I would say the overwhelming majority of people who are coming to this country want a better job. They're fleeing violence, rape, murder by drug cartels. They're actually fleeing the drug cartels. Are the drug cartels involved in smuggling? I don't know, probably. But the narrative that Donald Trump presented to the country, I don't think it is based on empirical data or empirical evidence. I think the majority of people who come here, going through the Rio Grande and going through desert conditions and going through dangerous conditions, I don't think people are going to risk their lives to do that unless the lives they're leading are lives of desperation. Another thing we have to understand when you're talking about immigration, we often say, well, it's immigrants are coming in who are brown or black. No, they're immigrants who are coming in here of all races, all ethnicities. It's not just black and brown people, and the overwhelming majority of these people are law-abiding. The other fact is that when they actually do the data, that the immigrants who have come here and taken jobs, if you look at crime and if you look at arrest, they are not in the majority, they are in the minority. That's New York Times, Washington Post, Charlotte Observer. So once again, I really have to question, where are people getting their facts from? Are they getting it from Fox News? Are they getting it from Facebook? And again, I really think it's important that if we're going to really find out the truth about immigration, we're going to have to A, bring in immigrants themselves, B, bring in the police, bring in Border Patrol, bring in local elected officials, have town hall meetings, and really figure this out. And
okay, I have to interrupt you. Michael, we only have 4 minutes left, so I would like you to really give him your opinion about this issue of immigration.
My opinion is not opinion, it's based on facts. First of all, I'll go to an op-ed I wrote in 2009. We'll talk about that, which was way pre-COVID. But where are the statistics coming about the crime and the drugs? They're coming from the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. They're coming from the FBI, and they're coming from police departments and state police all over this country who are seizing the drugs that are coming across the border, who are dealing with the people who have been criminals coming across the border, who are raping women, our women who are on their way over here, the families that are coming over with their children who are being raped and assaulted on the way over. That's the problem, Joel. That's where the statistics are coming from. So these aren't rumors from Fox News or Facebook or Instagram or anybody else. These are facts from the FBI statistics and police departments, and it's happening every day. We read about them. The op-ed I wrote in 2009, we were talking about diseases coming over here. How come the Biden administration will not test anybody for COVID coming over the border, does not will just lets them in, doesn't insist that they get a vaccine or anything else, and we're spreading COVID all over the Southwest in this country, and before you know it, it's going to go all over the place. And the questions on all these Haitians coming in from the earthquake, you tell me they are not coming in from the earthquake, because the satellite photos that the FBI and the military has been using since the earthquake and photos don't show anybody coming from a boat to get into Mexico. It's 2,000 miles from Haiti to Mexico, or to Central America, to start walking up through Mexico. Those are the Haitians who have already been here from years and years in Central America, waiting to sneak in or get into the United States. And that's the problem. And by the way, people at the border are handing out food stamp cards and vouchers to people who are coming over the border so they can get substance. That's what they're doing. So they are coming in from the candy store. And the reason they're coming here is the United States is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's got nothing to do with climate change, because the hurricanes in Central America were no different than the hurricanes in the United States that devastated Louisiana and Florida and the other southern states. And not only the hurricanes, but all the tornadoes in the Midwest, in the desert, in the areas in the Southwest. So it's not climate change. It has nothing to do with climate change.
Okay, it's unfortunate that we have so little time. Unfortunately, we're going to be cut off. So with that said, I want to thank Joel Segal and Michael Solomon for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's a good debate that the two of you are having, and I would like to invite you back, because there are other issues that are so important. We're going to talk about, I hope, anti-Semitism in the next show that we do. Gentlemen, would you give out your information for all our audience?
Thank you. My third novel has just been released. It's Under the Divvy Tree. It's a love story entwined around a medical mystery. It was already written for the Hollywood screen. I don't know if it's going to get produced this year or next, but we're hoping for it. And my website is michaelsolomonbooks.com. You can learn all about me and my books on that site. So that should do it.
Oh, sure. Joel, JOEL .r.segal, SEGAL @gmail.com.
With that said, again, thank you, gentlemen, for being on my show.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Susan. My pleasure. Thank you, Joel. It was a lively debate.